Hi, Mike. Thank you for taking time to talk with me today. So as I understand it, you own and operate North County Trees, a family-run nursery and landscaping company on the Central Coast. Can you tell us a little bit about what initially sparked your interest in plants?
Sure. I started gardening very young. My grandparents were immigrants, and in order to make money, they started raising rabbits and chickens and lots of stuff. But eventually, they started growing orchids and splitting orchids and selling them in the Los Angeles area. So I learned a lot at that time, and then I started doing mowing and gardening pretty young, maybe elementary school and middle school. So I've always kind of been around it. And then I moved to Santa Barbara for college, Santa Barbara City College, and started working in a more formal landscaping industry there in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then actually became a high school teacher for quite a bit of time, and just wanted to be back outside. So we opened North County Trees in, let's see here, 2016. And it's grown. We're a grower and provider of almost 4,000 different plants, and we run freight trucks through the county and into Monterey and Santa Barbara every week. And we'll kind of work anywhere in the state, and we're even starting to do some projects in Arizona and Nevada.
Wow, that's really awesome. So what is the primary focus of North County Trees with the full scope of everything you do?
That's a big question. I'd say the primary focus is I noticed there was a lack of quality plants and trees and, all landscaping plants in this county, specifically San Luis Obispo County. And I wanted to find a way to provide wholesale pricing and commercial pricing to homeowners, ranch owners, wedding venues, and kind of free them up from having to pay retail pricing. And there's some really good retailers, which we recommend all the time. But we adopted the philosophy of quality, value, and service very early on. So if somebody wants some cactuses or something that's unusual, or they need 3,000 olive trees to start their own oil farm, or we just did a project, 6 acres of fruit trees. The first filter everything goes through is working with really good partners where quality is number one. The second step is making sure that we're procuring those materials through a partner in as affordable price as possible for our partners, the client. And then the third step is dealing with all the logistics. So that's taken off the client's plate. So everything that's done in this county has to go through Department of Agriculture inspections. Things have to be moved through the state to different inspection yards. All that work is taken off the client's plate. And basically, they just have an 18-wheeler show up at their property or job site with all those materials, or they can also pick up at one of our 8 yards, which is our Atascadero yard, and that's our main hub because it's kind of in the middle of the state.
So if I was a homeowner and wanted to experience the quality, value, and service of North County Trees, how would starting a project with you typically go?
So usually it starts with a conversation a lot like this. We kind of chat about your goals, and I try and get an idea of what the client is picturing in their head in terms of a final result. And sometimes that means scheduling a farm visit at our Atascadero yard. Quite often it means me going out to the future job site and walking the grounds with the client and trying to get a real idea of what they see in their head. Sometimes, and quite often, their ideas are unrealistic, either through financial reasons or they're attracted to plants that don't necessarily do well in the area. But the cool part is there's usually alternatives that are really similar that will do well, or we're able to source materials much smaller than they would see through other options, and it does become affordable. And in 5 years, everything looks like they were thinking in the first place. And the results are really awesome when someone isn't overextended and they still get to execute their vision.
So what is the most important piece of advice that you would give to someone, whether they wanted to work with you or not, and were starting a landscaping project?
I'd say think of landscaping like painting a house or painting the inside of a house. If you've ever done something like that, the actual painting is the easy part. It's the preparation, cleaning the walls, doing all the tape. So it's kind of the same philosophy. The plants are the easiest part. So proper ground preparation. Have you thought about your irrigation? Have you thought about your positioning of which plants are going to grow well in different sun areas? Fertigation system, which is just a fancy way of saying there's a nutrition plan for the plant, either through compost or injection systems, because basically you have to feed these things if you want them to look really good. There's a lot of plants that will survive with minimal care, but if you want them to thrive, which is really important for property value, which is something we're all focused on, then it takes a lot of thought and planning to make sure it works. And then once everything's in the ground, you need a maintenance plan. And whether that means hiring a professional gardener or doing it yourself, they need to be taken care of. I often call them crops, and that throws homeowners off because you're just becoming a little farmer of your own landscape, and it's going to take some love, but the results are pretty amazing when it comes out good, and you can really bump the value of your property.
So on that note, what piece of advice would you give to someone for planting trees in this area for ensuring long-term success?
The old corny saying that I say at least 20 times a week to people is you want to put a $1 tree in a $2 hole. And I think we have some PDFs either on the website or you can email us, but it's all about preparation. So if you're going to put in a 15-gallon tree, which is about 18 inches wide, then you want to dig about a 36-inch wide hole and amend the soil that the tree is going to grow into. You don't want to plant it too deep. You don't want to plant it too shallow. And then you want to make sure it's getting watered. That first year is really critical. One mistake I see a lot is people say, oh, it's drought tolerant, or oh, it's native. But that doesn't mean it's not going to need water and nutrition at least the first 2 years.
That's really great advice. So I know we already talked about how important quality, value, and service are to you, but if you could just summarize that again for me and the core values and ethics that guide North County Trees that you really want your customers to understand about working with you.
I think probably the most important thing is I realize money is hard to get and easy to give away. So we do everything we can to stretch the value of the money that's being spent by our clients. And so anytime we're quoting materials, you're going to get plant measurements. So you'll know, say, a 5-gallon is 10 inches by 10 inches, or a 15 is 24 by 24. And if the specs are better in a smaller container, then we're almost always going to recommend those because it's almost a 3-to-1. Every time you go up a size, a container size, you're almost spending 3 times as much. The other thing I try and tell people is don't think about it as buying the size of the plant. You're buying years. So there's about 18 months of growth, that's an average, between each container size. So you can kind of project growth by looking at the measurements of the different containers.
Is there anything else that you would like to add that you think your customers would find helpful?
I think planning's huge. It's not a casual thing to go buy a bunch of plants and just stick them in the ground and hope everything's going to go well. You should reach out to us early Usually, sometimes I'll work with a client for 2 or 3 years getting a project ready before we actually deliver. We can turn around and provide materials in as quick as a week, but you want to plan and then prep and then plant PPP.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for doing this. I'm happy we had the time today. I know I learned a lot, and what you're doing is really great. I hope everyone has an opportunity to work with a nursery who cares as much about their plants and their customers as you. So
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, this was awesome, and thank you everyone out there for listening.